You ever find something from your parents' past, and it changes the way you see them forever? This summer, I found a cassette tape from 1966 that my mom was never meant to hear. It led me to a man she loved long before I was born, and to a story that's been waiting nearly 60 years to be told. You know how sometimes you find something in an old box that completely flips the way you remember your past? That happened to me in the spring of 1998, but the story really starts way earlier, in the summer of 1977. Back then, I was 11 and our whole neighborhood revolved around the courtyard. It was the kind of place where kids played until the streetlights came on, moms leaned out of windows to call you for dinner, and everyone knew exactly which family had the best-smelling barbecue on Sundays. We lived in a 2-story brick apartment building with peeling green paint on the stair rails, and a laundry line strung across the courtyard where bedsheets flapped like sails. Across from us was a tiny grocery shop run by Mrs. Dunlop, who seemed ancient even then, with her cat-eye glasses and habit of wrapping candy individually in wax paper before handing it to you. That summer, my best friend was Tommy Price. He was 13, always wore a Boston Red Sox cap even though we lived in Ohio, and had this contagious laugh that could make even the grumpiest neighbor crack a smile. We'd spend hours riding our Schwinn bikes, listening to the crackle of AM radio, usually Hotel California or Dreams by Fleetwood Mac drifting through the static, and daring each other to sneak into the old carriage house at the edge of town. The carriage house was the kind of place parents warned us about. Dusty, leaning to one side with shattered windows and vines curling through the cracks. Rumor had it, during Prohibition it was used for something illegal, though no one ever gave details. For us, it was a treasure cave, stacks of old trunks, broken furniture, yellowing newspapers from before we were born. And one day in late August, that's where I first saw the letter. It was stuffed inside a hardback book with no cover, hidden under a pile of faded coats. The paper was folded into a perfect square, tied with a piece of red yarn, and had a faint smell of lavender. On the outside, in careful handwriting, it said simply, "To M, in case you ever wonder." At 11 years old, I didn't really know what to do with something like that. I wasn't even sure if M was a man or a woman. Tommy said we should open it, but something in me felt weird about it, like it was important, private. So, I tucked it into my backpack and told him I'd figure it out. I kept that letter in the top drawer of my nightstand for about 3 weeks. I'd take it out sometimes, turn it over in my hands, and wonder about M. Was it someone's lost love? A family secret? Goodbye? Then, one afternoon in September '77, my mom decided my room was a health hazard, and cleaned it while I was at school. When I got home, the letter was gone. She didn't even remember seeing it, probably thought it was just scrap paper and tossed it. For years, I'd occasionally think about that red yarn and neat handwriting, but like most childhood mysteries, it just faded into the background. Life rolled on. Tommy moved away in '81 when his dad got a job in Florida. I started high school, got my first Walkman, fell in love for the first time while Take On Me played in the background, graduated, worked at the local hardware store, got married, and moved into my own little house. By the late '90s, my parents were downsizing, which meant clearing out the apartment I'd grown up in. I spent days wading through boxes of my old school projects, cracked cassette tapes, VHS movies with fuzzy labels, and photo albums with that yellowed plastic film that stuck to your fingers. And then, at the bottom of a cardboard box marked Miscellaneous, I found it. The same hardback book with no cover. The pages were brittle now, and the red yarn had faded to a dull pink. But it was the same letter, "To M, in case you ever wonder," still perfectly folded, still smelling faintly of lavender, though the scent was weaker. This time I didn't hesitate. I sat on the floor of my old bedroom, now stripped bare, and untied the yarn. The paper crackled in my hands. The handwriting inside was the same delicate script. It began, If you are reading this, I have not been able to tell you in person. I hope you understand why. I have carried this with me for years, hoping the right moment would come, but it never did. So I leave it here, knowing you may stumble upon it one day." The letter went on, but the words started to blur, because by the second paragraph I realized exactly who it was written to. And it wasn't me. The letter mentioned a specific street name, our street, and then a date, September 1965. That was almost 12 years before I found it. It also mentioned, "The night you left without saying goodbye," and "The child you never knew." By the third paragraph I was sitting there with my hands shaking. It wasn't some random M from a century ago. It was my mother. The letter was from a man named Daniel, and the tone was somewhere between love and regret. He wrote about their nights dancing at the community center when Can't Help Falling in Love would come on the jukebox, how they'd talk until sunrise sitting on the hood of his Chevy, and how they made plans to leave town together, plans my mom apparently abandoned at the last minute. And then there was the part that made my breath catch. I don't know if you told him about her. If she is happy and safe, that's enough for me. But I would give anything to see her once, just once, to know she's real. There was no her in our family except me. I sat there for a long time, staring at those words, trying to make sense of them. Was Daniel my father? Was my mom hiding this my entire life? I didn't say anything right away. I put the letter back inside the book, tied the faded yarn, and kept it with me. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the old fridge and the occasional car passing outside. Every sound felt sharper, like the whole apartment was holding its breath with me. The next morning, over coffee at the chipped kitchen table, I finally asked, "Mom, who's Daniel?" Her spoon stopped mid-stir. She didn't look up right away, just stared at the swirling coffee like she could climb into it and hide. After a few seconds, she sighed and leaned back in her chair. "I was wondering when you'd find that letter," she said quietly. My stomach tightened. "So it's true?" She nodded slowly, the corners of her eyes crinkling, not from a smile but from years of carrying something heavy. She told me she'd met Daniel in '64. He was new in town, fixing up cars in his uncle's garage, playing guitar at weekend dances. They fell hard, the kind of young love where you think the whole world will bend to your plans. Then in late '65 she found out she was pregnant, with me. Her parents were strict, old-fashioned. Daniel wanted to leave together, start fresh in California. But the night they were supposed to go, she couldn't do it. She was scared and she stayed. Her father told her never to contact Daniel again, and soon after, Daniel left town for good. She never saw him again. The letter, she explained, had been slipped into her mailbox a few years later, but by then she was married to the man I'd grown up calling Dad. She never answered it. "I didn't want you to think your life was incomplete," she said, her voice cracking. "You had a father who loved you. I thought it was kinder to leave the past where it was." I didn't know whether to feel angry for all the years of silence or grateful for finally knowing. Mostly I just felt hollow and full at the same time. For the next few weeks, that letter never left my nightstand. I'd read it at odd hours, 2 in the morning while the world outside was quiet, and imagine the man behind the words. What did he look like now? Did he still have the same laugh my mom described? Was he even alive? I didn't tell my stepdad. He'd been my dad in every way that mattered, and I didn't want to hurt him. But the pull to know more about Daniel grew stronger. This was the late '90s, before Facebook, before Google made it easy to dig up someone's whole life in 5 clicks. Finding a man named Daniel from small-town Illinois was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Still I tried. I asked around. I called an old classmate of my mom's who vaguely remembered him. She thought she'd heard he'd gone to Arizona, maybe New Mexico. Months passed with nothing but dead ends. Then one Sunday, while flipping through the local paper at my kitchen table, I saw it, a tiny notice in the communities section. Local musician to perform reunion concert at St. Mark's Hall. Daniel Rivers returns after 30 years. My hands started trembling before I'd even finished reading. It had to be him. The concert was the following Friday. I told my mom I was going out with friends, though she probably guessed the truth. St. Mark's Hall looked almost exactly the same as it did in the old photos Mom had shown me. Wood-paneled walls, a faint smell of coffee and floor wax, folding chairs lined up in uneven rows. I slipped into the back just as the lights dimmed. Then he walked out. Daniel. His hair was mostly gray now, but he still had that same easy way of carrying himself, guitar slung over his shoulder. He started playing, an old Elvis tune, and his voice had that warm, worn-in quality like your favorite record that's been played 1,000 times but still makes you feel something new. Halfway through the set, he told a story about a girl from this town he once loved, how they'd sit on the hood of his Chevy talking about everything and nothing, how he sometimes still thought about her when he played certain songs. I knew he was talking about Mom. When the music ended, people lined up to greet him. My feet felt like they weighed 100 pounds, but somehow I moved forward until I was standing right in front of him. "Hi," I said. "My name's Emily. I think you knew my mother." "Mary." He froze for a second. His eyes searched my face like he was reading a map he hadn't seen in decades. Then his voice cracked just a little. "You're her." We stood there for a moment, both unsure what to say next. Daniel finally broke the silence with a soft laugh. "You've got her eyes," he said, shaking his head like he couldn't believe it. We moved to a quiet corner of the hall. The chatter and clinking coffee cups faded into the background. He asked about my life, my work, where I lived. Then I asked about his. He'd moved to Arizona in '68, bounced between construction jobs and bar gigs, never married. "I came close once," he admitted, "but she wasn't Mary." There was no bitterness in his voice, just a kind of acceptance that comes with time. He told me he'd written dozens of songs about my mom, though only a few ever made it to a stage. Then he reached into his guitar case and pulled out a worn cassette tape, labeled in faded handwriting, "For M. I recorded this in '66, right before I left. Never got to give it to her. I think it belongs to you now." I took it, my fingers brushing the rough edge of the label. A part of me wanted to run straight to Mom, play it for her immediately. Another part wanted to keep it to myself for just a while, like holding on to a secret piece of history. Before I left, Daniel hugged me. Not a quick, polite hug, but the kind that says I've waited decades for this moment. "You tell her," he paused, swallowing hard. "Tell her I never stopped wishing her happiness." I drove home that night with the cassette sitting on the passenger seat, glancing at it every few miles like it might vanish if I didn't keep an eye on it. When I walked in, Mom was in the kitchen, wearing her old blue robe and making tea. "I went to St. Mark's tonight," I said quietly. She froze, teacup halfway to the counter. "You saw him?" It wasn't a question. I nodded and handed her the cassette. For a long moment, she just stared at it, her fingers tracing the faded ink. Then she went to the living room, pulled out the old Sony cassette player we hadn't used in years and pressed play. The room filled with the gentle hiss of tape, followed by his voice, young, full of hope. It was a love song, simple and honest, about late-night drives and promises whispered under street lamps. By the second verse, Mom's eyes were glistening. "He always said he'd be famous one day," she murmured with a small smile. "Guess he was just famous to me." When the tape clicked off, she sat in silence for a while, then looked at me. "Thank you for finding him," she said. "Some things you think are gone forever, but sometimes they just take the long way back." We never saw Daniel again. He left town the next morning. But that song stayed with us. Every now and then, Mom would play it on a Sunday afternoon, humming along as she folded laundry. And I'd sit there, feeling like I'd been given a tiny piece of her youth, a reminder that love in all its forms doesn't really fade. Sometimes the past doesn't knock on your door, you have to go looking for it. And when you find it, it might just change the way you see the people you love. What's something from your past you wish you could find again? Share it in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories.